She's just a footnote. My VP sneered at the $80 million buyers. Their counsel read the contract and asked who's the assignee. I raised my hand. The VP's bravado evaporated. He stared at me, then at the lawyer, who just whispered, "Oh, you are so screwed. Do you know your badge has been deactivated?" The security guard at the front desk said it like he was announcing the weather. Bland, apologetic. Not his circus. Margaret blinked once. Then again. The turnstile hadn't clicked. Her little green light didn't flash. She was standing there, reusable coffee mug in one hand, a Ziploc bag of homemade banana bread in the other, while the Monday morning parade of suits flowed around her like she was a lamppost, gave a dry smile. "Well, I guess that depends on whether Midway Systems has a death wish this week." The guard didn't laugh. She didn't expect him to. It wasn't the first time she'd been invisible. In 9 years, Margaret had written contracts that kept Midway's lights on, structured licensing deals that protected 8-figure patents, and buried enough firewalls into joint ownership clauses that their most valuable IPS at Project Sable was basically Fort Knox in PDF form. And yet, to everyone above the 4th floor, she was just legal ops. An email signature, a name on red lines, someone you CC'd at the end of the deal, if you remembered. She'd come from accounting, originally, fought tooth and nail to claw her way out of that beige graveyard of spreadsheets and into something with teeth. Licensing was where the real power lived, where details weren't just bullet points, they were weapons. Margaret understood that better than anyone. She wasn't flashy, didn't talk about vision or synergy or any of the other buzzwords the sales guys threw around like cologne. What she did was read. All of it. Every contract. Every footnote. Every revision. While Carter Lane, Midway's new VP of Strategic Operations, was strutting around talking about liquidity events and reclaiming agile dominance, Margaret was tucked in the legal subfolders of their biggest client's cloud storage, highlighting clause language Carter would have needed a flashlight and a law degree to understand. Project Sable was her crown jewel. A tangled spiderweb of patent rights, shared development notes, usage triggers, and royalty escalators tied to performance metrics only she and the outside counsel had fully mapped. At its peak, it brought in $12 million a quarter. Margaret didn't just help negotiate it, she built the compliance framework from scratch. Drafted the assignment writer herself, the one no one ever bothered to read, the one that quietly made her the sole assignee of any transfer of Sable's core assets. Not legal. Not Midway. Her. She never flaunted it. That wasn't the point. The point was protection of the work, the company, the long game. Seen too many licensing disasters collapse under hasty M&As and clueless VPs trying to show off with asset dumps. The clause was her insurance policy. A seatbelt no one thought they needed until the crash. But things had started changing fast when Carter arrived. First came the vision decks, then the consultants. Suddenly, every hallway was filled with words like sunset, synergize, and lean optimization. Entire departments disappeared. Man fired the facilities team and started outsourcing janitorial to an app. An app. Then he came for licensing. Margaret had kept her head down at first, watching Carter surgically slice the org chart. He spoke at town halls like he was on Shark Tank, talking about asset repositioning and shareholder momentum. People clapped. Margaret sat stone-faced. She knew what he was eyeing. Knew the spreadsheet he'd waved around last week, with a fat red arrow pointing at legacy IP Sable. She knew what he was planning before he did. That Monday morning, standing outside the turnstile, badge dead and banana bread sweating in her purse, she finally saw it for what it was. He hadn't just missed the clause, he had no idea she was the clause. Carter Lane walked into Midway like a man who'd just fired God, and planned to run the universe with a whiteboard and a Bluetooth headset. He was tan in that try-hard California way, like he'd been marinated and linked in filters and protein powder. His shoes looked too expensive to walk in. His handshake lasted half a second too long. And his first sentence in the all-hands meeting was, "I didn't come here to make friends. I came to modernize." Someone actually whooped. Margaret reached for her Tylenol. Carter was the new VP of Strategic Operations, which, near as anyone could tell, meant high-functioning chaos monkey with PowerPoint privileges. He'd come in on a wave of boardroom desperation, hired straight off some VC firm that sold pet tracking and FTs, or whatever garbage Silicon Valley was huffing that quarter. His resume was long on exits and short on context. The man could sell a bicycle to a fish. He couldn't read a contract to save his life. He strutted through departments with a little leather-bound moleskin and a smile like a blunt instrument. Everywhere he went, heads rolled. Accounting became a skeleton crew in 2 weeks. HR got merged with people optimization. Facilities, outsourced to a firm called Motley. Legal, Margaret's division, got rebranded as Process Risk. But the worst was what he called the asset clans. Printed spreadsheets like he was staging a coup. Assets, portfolios, patents, licenses, each labeled with traffic light colors. Sable, The most lucrative and labyrinthine piece of Midway's intellectual property was marked bright red. Legacy bloat, Carter called it. Operational anchor. Fat ripe for trimming. Margaret asked for meeting. Got 15 minutes in a glass-walled conference room next to the espresso bar he'd installed. Showed up with a Ev-Sable documentation printed tab labeled. Carter didn't even open it. "This isn't the 90s, he said, smirking. "We don't need binder queens, we need velocity." "I built the compliance shell for Sable," she replied, voice clipped. "There's an assignment clause 14.2c. It was part of a dual joint restructuring when the Korea deal collapsed. You can't touch those assets without Margaret." He didn't raise his voice, just held up a palm like a preacher calming a sheep. "You're obviously passionate, but this thing's bleeding overhead. The board's aligned. We're moving the portfolio to Crescent Ridge Capital. 80 million? All cash? It's a no-brainer." She stared at him like he'd just offered to auction off his kidneys on eBay. He smiled wider. "Go enjoy your early retirement. Or maybe freelance. I hear a lot of you back-office types are doing great on Upwork." Margaret stood slowly. He didn't yell. Didn't argue. Just tapped the folder once. "You might want to read what you're about to sell." And she walked out. That night, at her kitchen table, she opened her personal laptop and pulled up the clause from memory. Paragraph 14.2c of the Sable Licensing Agreement. All rights, transfers, sublicensing, divestitures, or changes to controlling interest of the Sable core asset shall be subject to signatory assignment by the designated custodial assignee, her name, on the line. Assigned by Midway's then General Counsel and countersigned by their overseas partner, Ironclad. Easily missed by anyone reading fast. The next morning, she typed a one-sentence email to the internal legal team. Subject: urgent Sable assignment writer body, refer to clause 14.2c, before executing any sale or LOI re. Sable asset portfolio. She BCC'd herself, hit send. No reply. She wasn't surprised. The next day, her calendar vanished, her access to the shared drive was revoked. A courier delivered a padded envelope with exit documents and a coupon for a career coaching webinar. Margaret didn't cry. She went outside, trimmed her hydrangeas, drank a Diet Coke, and watched the boardroom smoke machine rev up for its next quarterly illusion. They just put a price tag on a bomb they didn't know was live, and she was the one holding the trigger. The HR girl couldn't have been more than 25, still wearing her intern enthusiasm like it hadn't curdled yet. She handed Margaret a cardboard box with one of those tight-lipped smiles that said, "I hate this." Not enough to stop it. "We've prepared your severance documents," she chirped, as if she were offering a cookie. "There's a 2-week consultancy clause just in case we need transition support. It's standard." Margaret took the box without blinking. Her mug, her stapler, a ceramic cactus, and a photo of her and her dog that no one ever noticed in the first place. No one asked her what needed to be handed off. No questions about the status of the contract audits, open IP disputes, or the foreign compliance review she'd been running solo since 2019. Carter had made it clear he didn't need context, just clean exits. Margaret was obsolete, an appendix, her badge deactivated with a quiet beep. Her Outlook account vanished while she was still in the elevator. She walked out of Midway Systems with nothing but a box of things and a clause in her back pocket that would soon detonate. It was early March. Air still had that gray Cincinnati wetness, like winter refusing to die. She got in her Corolla, drove home in silence, and set the box on her kitchen table. The ceramic cactus tipped sideways. She didn't bother to fix it. Over the next few days, her phone didn't ring. Not from legal. Not from IT. Not even from Diane in procurement, who used to call whenever she couldn't find the latest writer template. She did get was a LinkedIn update from Carter. Thrilled to be leading Midway's next evolution. Streamlined, strategic, scalable. Attached was a photo of him at some executive summit, flanked by 2 guys in vests with teeth too white to be trustworthy. The caption? "Legacy is dead. Velocity is king." She closed the app and opened her Sable archive. The sale was moving fast. Crescent Ridge Capital had issued a letter of intent. Friend and Legal had mentioned it in a side text before ghosting. Margaret watched the news drip out in vague press language. Significant IP restructuring, portfolio repositioning, asset optimization. All the euphemisms that meant the same thing. Carter was burning the house for insurance money. The number floated up like a greasy balloon. $80 million. 80, for a portfolio that still had pending patents. Open usage triggers. A licensing clause so specific it had a contingency section for submarine jurisdictions. Carter didn't know, or didn't care. Margaret kept a legal pad on her kitchen table and jotted every milestone in pencil. March 10th. Lois signed. March 14th. Press release draft leaks. March 18th. Internal town hall scheduled. The March 10th entry had an asterisk. Clause 14.2c remains unacknowledged. Carter, meanwhile, was glowing. Word around town was that he was being floated for a board seat at a new biotech startup. Midway stock had ticked up a few percentage points on news of the Sable sale. He strutted across podcasts and panels like a man who thought gravity had been repealed in his honor. Margaret bought a new pack of highlighters. Yellow for buyer-side errors. Pink for Midway oversights. Blue for compliance gaps. She went to Trader Joe's. She watered her lawn. She kept a bottle of Prosecco in the fridge and didn't open it, because she knew something they didn't. Clause 14.2c wasn't just a bureaucratic tripwire. It was a hand grenade with a smiley face drawn on the pin. It gave her, Margaret E. Halpern, formerly Invisible Legal Ops Analyst, final say over any transfer of Project Sable's core intellectual property, her signature, or no deal. No one had asked her to waive it. No one had contacted her at all. Carter had been so eager to erase her name from the org chart that he hadn't noticed where else it was printed. So Margaret waited, not out of spite, not even for revenge. She was just giving them time. Time to realize how deep in the weeds they really were. Time to feel the rope tighten. And when the moment came, the meeting, the question, the collapse, she'd already be there. Calm, patient, with her pen uncapped and her answer ready, she waited 5 days before sending the message. Just one. To one person. Elliot Tran, Midway's senior counsel and the only man in legal who ever remembered to bring her coffee the way she liked it. Black. 2 sugars. No questions. He was meticulous. Quiet. Allergic to drama. If anyone still read the damn contracts at Midway, it was Elliot. Her message was short. Hey, Re. Clause 14.2c on Sable. Please confirm it's been addressed before the sale. And the reply came 3 hours later. They already signed the LOI. No. How are you? No emoji. No buffer. Just the sentence. Cold. Final. Margaret stared at it for a long time. Then closed her laptop. She didn't follow up, because she understood what that line really meant. The train had left the station, and no one on board had checked if the tracks were made of paper. Crescent Ridge Capital had begun due diligence, and Carter was peacocking around like a man who'd cracked capitalism itself. There was an all-hands town hall streamed live on a Thursday. Margaret watched from her couch, bowl of stale popcorn in her lap. Carter stood in front of a branded step and repeat, sleeves rolled. Microphone clipped like he was hosting a text event on how to kill your own company and look good doing it. We've identified key redundancies, he said, smiling. Legacy licensing was a drag on velocity. Deadweight, so we cut it. Deadweight. Margaret didn't flinch. She just picked up her remote and rewound the clip, watching his mouth shape the words again. Dead. Wait. He didn't just mean the team. He meant her. The woman who built the Sable framework from scraps of conflicting patents, EU compliance laws, and enough red tape to mummify a lawyer. She clicked her pen and jotted in her legal pad. March 21st, Carter calls licensing deadweight, clause still unacknowledged. The buyers were moving quickly. Articles started circulating in investor newsletters. Crescent Ridge set to acquire $80 million patent block from Midway Systems. Strategic realignment signals operational agility. All nonsense. None of them had seen what Margaret had tucked into the clause footnotes like landmines, but someone else had. It started with a LinkedIn ping, a name she didn't recognize, junior associate at a boutique law firm in Chicago. Hi, Margaret. I'm working on a licensing diligence matter involving Project Sable. Your name came up as the assigned custodian on several core asset schedules. Would you be available for brief call? Off the record, of course. Margaret raised an eyebrow. She responded cautiously. Happy to chat. Next Tuesday, 2 p.m., off the clock. They met over video. The associate looked young, competent, already exhausted. Behind him, a shelf of thick binders and a dying ficus. We noticed something in the foundational agreements, he said after introductions. There's a recurring assignee notation. Your name appears on several riders, but it's unusual. It's not tied to your department. It's personal. Were you aware? She didn't smile, just leaned into the camera. I wrote them. The associate blinked. You. I was the assignment designee appointed by Midway and their foreign partner. Clause 14.2c. Without my signature, Sable's core IP rights cannot be transferred or divested in any capacity. A pause. Then the associate sat back, slowly. His poker face failed. Our client was not informed of this, I'm aware. Silence stretched. Margaret let it. He started scribbling in his notes, already picturing how this was going to play out in Monday's partner meeting. If this clause is enforced, there's no if, she said. He nodded. Be in touch. Margaret ended the call, closed her laptop, sat in the quiet. That had been the test, the moment, the signal flare. The buyers had finally hit the tripwire. And Carter, he was still out there doing interviews and pretending he'd already cashed the check. She poured herself a whiskey. Neat. No toast, because the next call wouldn't be polite. It would be surgical, and she'd already sharpened the knife. The meeting wasn't on the books. No invite, no calendar trace. Just a quietly forwarded address and a time. 10 a.m. Monday. Typed in courier font like something out of a Cold War novel. Margaret showed up 10 minutes early. It wasn't a boardroom or an office tower downtown. It was a coffee shop tucked between a dry cleaner and a nail salon. The kind of place with chip mugs and a chalkboard menu that hadn't changed in years. No logos, no witnesses, just Margaret, in a navy coat and clean slacks, pulled back like she was going to church and war at the same time. The buyer's lawyer arrived exactly on the hour, mid-40s. Crisp suit, wedding ring, no tie. He introduced himself as Colin, but the firm name he mumbled under his breath was enough. It wasn't some junior associate chasing billables. This was senior counsel for Crescent Ridge Capital, and he wasn't here for coffee. Margaret let him lead. Let him settle. Let him think he was in charge. Pulled out a folder. No laptops. Old school. I reviewed the Sable agreements personally last night, Colin said without preamble. There's something irregular. Margaret folded her hands around her mug. Only one thing. He didn't smile. There's a clause, 14.2c, he said slowly, that refers to an assignment designee whose signature is required for any material asset transfer or third-party IP control adjustment. Clause appears in the main agreement, the Korean Joint Development Rider, and the secondary sublicense terms. Margaret said nothing. Just nodded once. Keep going, counselor. The name listed as designee, he continued, is yours. She raised her eyebrows like she was being told the weather. That's correct. It's not the company. It's not legal. It's you, personally. Yes, how? Why was that structure approved? It was necessary, she replied evenly. The Korean licensing dispute happened in 2018. We needed a neutral domestic custodian for both parties to avoid dual jurisdiction litigation. I was appointed by both legal teams. The clause was reviewed, redrafted, and ratified by Midway's general counsel and our partner's external firm. Twice, Colin's jaw flexed, and no one revoked that designation. Margaret shook her head. It's irrevocable unless superseded by a new joint designation signed by both parties, which, given Midway's decision to purge half their staff without reading the documents, never happened. Colin opened his folder. Inside were printouts of the clauses, heavily annotated, highlighted, underlined, circled in different colors. His eyes scanned them again like he was hoping the words had changed overnight. They already signed the LOI, he muttered. Yes, Margaret said, sipping her coffee, without full compliance verification. If we proceed without your signature, the transfer is invalid, and any subsequent licensing derived from that invalid transfer will be exposed to clawback litigation, including punitive breach. He looked up. Finally, the posturing faded. Now he was just a man doing math. Risk, cost, public embarrassment, the kind of fallout that ruins careers and brands in the same breath. We were told, he said carefully, that Sable was clean. I'm sure you were, Margaret replied. But Carter Lane wouldn't know a chain of custody clause if it bit him on his overpriced loafers. Colin leaned back. His eyes narrowed. Will you sign? No. Is there a number? I'm not negotiating. This isn't about money. He studied her, probably trying to find the motive. Power? Spite? Legacy? But Margaret wasn't offering any of that. She gave him the truth, cold and dry. I'm not blocking the deal out of revenge. I'm blocking it because it's invalid. That's my job. Or at least it was. Until your golden boy tried to sell the engine without checking who had the key. He exhaled through his nose. The kind of sound men make when they realize they've stepped into quicksand in custom shoes. I assume you understand this could get complicated. I assume you understand it already has. He nodded once, stood, and gathered his folder without a handshake. We'll be in touch. She waited until he walked out before reaching for the little sugar packet in front of her. Tore it open, poured it into the half-full mug like nothing had happened. Because while Carter was out doing victory laps, the real race had already started, and he'd left his shoelaces untied. Margaret didn't need a spotlight. She had the paperwork. The conference room smelled like expensive leather chairs, bad decisions, and catered arrogance. Carter had requested the fancy one-glass walls downtown skyline view branded notepads at every seat. A small army of Midway execs, Crescent Ridge reps and legal observers filled the space like it was a coronation. Carter was in his element, hair, perfectly tousled blazer casually draped over the back of his chair, like even suits were too slow for him. He was grinning like a man who thought every camera in the world was watching. With this acquisition, he was saying, pacing behind the head of the table, we're not just offloading legacy weight, we're accelerating Midway's core strategy. This is about streamlining, removing friction, turning page one of a new era. Margaret could hear the words before she even stepped inside. She entered quietly. No announcement. No folder. No laptop. Just a plain gray blazer and the calm, bored face of a woman who'd already seen how this movie ended. Carter's eyes caught her as she slid into the back row beside Colin, buyer's lead counsel. She didn't smile. Neither did he. Carter hesitated, blinked, then went back to his monologue like a man refusing to believe in ghosts. Of course, the portfolio's clean, he continued, tossing the word like a dart, fully unencumbered. Everything's been scrubbed, vetted, greenlit. You won't find a single operational landmine in the structure. Margaret sipped her coffee. Lukewarm. Fitting. The head of Crescent Ridge's legal team, woman named Jordan, razor-sharp in a dark maroon suit, flipped a page in her binder, adjusted her glasses, and spoke for the first time. There's one final issue we'd like clarification on before we proceed. Carter turned to her, palms open, sales mode engaged. Shoot, she tapped a paragraph with her pen, the Sable IP agreements. Clause 14.2c references an individual assignment designee. For asset transfer approvals, like to confirm the name listed here, is no longer applicable. Carter didn't even look, just waved a hand like he was batting away a fly. Oh, that, he said with a chuckle. Yeah, that's old language. Boilerplate junk from a prior regime. Legal fiction. She's just a footnote. The room didn't laugh. Jordan raised an eyebrow. She. Carter's grin stiffened. He looked across the room toward Margaret. His voice dropped half an octave. Margaret Halpern, former legal ops. We let her go 2 months ago. Her involvement was minimal. Jordan didn't blink. Is that true, Miss Halpern? The air snapped tight. Everyone turned. Margaret didn't stand, didn't adjust her chair. She just raised her hand. I'm the assignee. No one spoke. A second passed. Then another. Carter's jaw twitched. He gave a little laugh. Too loud. Too sharp. Okay, that's look. I'm sure she thinks she's the assignee, but that clause, Jordan interrupted him. Voice like a scalpel. The clause is active and binding. We confirmed it with both Midway and your Korean joint partner. The designation was never revoked. Carter paled. Margaret turned to face him fully now. Calm? Poised. You didn't even read the writer, did you? He opened his mouth. Closed it. Jordan slid a paper across the table, highlighted in yellow. Margaret's name printed under the signature line. We'll need her written approval before we can finalize. Jordan said simply. Margaret held up both hands, palms empty, no pen. The silence was deafening. One of the Crescent Ridge reps scribbled something onto a sticky note. Another reached for a water bottle with shaking hands. Carter just stood there, frozen, like someone had unplugged him mid-sentence. Margaret leaned back, crossed one leg over the other. She didn't need to say anything else. The clause had spoken. Page made a soft SHHHK as it slid across the glossy table, landing right in front of Carter like a legal death certificate with Margaret's name on it. Clause 14.2c. Underlined in bold, annotated by 2 firms and initialed by 3 parties, none of them Carter. The buyer's counsel, Colin, sat back in his chair, arms crossed, face unreadable. The power had shifted, subtly but absolutely. This wasn't a conversation anymore. It was a reading of last rites. Carter picked up the page with slow, twitching fingers, scanned it once, then again, his brow furrowed like he was trying to translate Sanskrit into money. No, he said quietly. No. This can't be right. This clause, this has to be superseded. It wasn't, Colin replied. Carter's eyes flitted to Margaret, was still seated calmly at the back of the room like she'd just wandered in from a knitting circle and accidentally stumbled into a boardroom hostage situation. He stood abruptly, voice rising. You're bluffing. Margaret didn't even blink. Jordan, the buyer's lead, closed her binder with a quiet thump. She's not. There's no way this stands. She doesn't work here anymore. She's not even on payroll. How can she have authority? It's not tied to employment, Colin said. Voice cool. It's tied to custodial designation. Personal, assigned, irrevocable without joint party agreement, which your team never sought or apparently read. Carter looked like a man realizing he'd stepped off a curb into traffic and the horn was already blaring. He turned to Margaret. Okay, fine. You made your point. You've been heard. Now be reasonable. We're all here to make this work. Margaret finally stood slowly. No rush, she walked to the head of the table and picked up the contract. Carter had just tried to sell without her. Her voice was clear. Even a scalpel, not a hammer. I am the assignee on Project Sable. She looked him dead in the eye, and I do not approve this sale. The words dropped like a steel door slamming shut. No signature, no deal. The Midway delegation collectively stiffened. HR shifted in his chair. Legal looked like they wanted to teleport. Carter opened his mouth. Nothing came out. Not a word. Just the high-pitched wheeze of someone whose parachute hadn't deployed. Jordan nodded once. That concludes the meeting. She stood, gathering her documents with surgical grace. Crescent Ridge's COO said nothing. Just followed her out like a man leaving the scene of a controlled demolition. One of the analysts paused to shoot Margaret a subtle, incredulous nod before disappearing behind the door. And Carter, he stayed frozen, hands flat on the table, like he could hold the sale together through sheer denial. Margaret leaned in just slightly. voice low. You called me a footnote. She tapped the clause. I'm the damn signature line. Then she turned and walked out. No fanfare. No strut. Just a quiet, measured exit, like someone leaving a chessboard with the king still upright, knowing they never even had to say checkmate. Behind her, the silence roared. By noon, the buyers were gone. No calls, no counter, no face-saving delay tactics. Just a silent exodus of Crescent Ridge execs in black sedans, folders clutched tight, mouths tighter. Midway's $80 million miracle sale evaporated like it had never existed. The glass conference room sat empty now, chairs still askew from the scramble, condensation rings on the table like bullet holes. Carter stood inside it alone for a while, staring down at the paper Margaret had tapped only hours before, as if he could will it to say something else, something reversible, something that wouldn't make him look like a fraud in a $900 sport coat. It didn't. Upstairs, the board was already in emergency session. Someone had whispered dereliction of duty before the door closed. Another mentioned fiduciary negligence. No one said Carter's name out loud. They didn't have to. Everyone knew who set the bonfire and smiled while lighting the match. Margaret didn't bother watching the fallout in real time. She wasn't a sadist. She just knew math, and the numbers weren't in Carter's favor. Back at her house, she pulled up Midway's internal news portal out of morbid curiosity. One new update, announcement. Midway Systems begins leadership transition. As part of our evolving strategic vision, we thank Carter Lane for his contributions and wish him well in his future endeavors. Was the corporate version of being shoved out a side door with your box of shame and a $20 door gift card? No apology. No correction. Just vanishing. A ghost in Gucci shoes. Margaret leaned back in her chair and watched the blue loading bar spin on her old Midway VPN access. Still dead, still gone. They never reactivated it. Never asked for knowledge transfer, never even thought to check if the detonator they tossed into the dumpster was still live. That had been the plan all along. She didn't want her job back. She never wanted a plaque or a name on a door. What she wanted was security, real security, not the false promise of loyalty from a company that would cut her loose without a second thought. So she gave herself an insurance policy. Clause 14.2c. Carter had been chugging green juice and building reorg slides with buzzwords and bar graphs. Margaret had been drafting safeguards in the subclauses, planting legal anchors, writing her name not where it could be erased, but where it had to be read. Every single time. That clause wasn't spite, it was survival. The final domino fell the next morning when Midway's general counsel resigned to explore new opportunities. Translation. Jump ship before being blamed for not flagging the one clause that sunk a deal worth more than a quarter of Midway's projected annual revenue. Legal would become of the sales team? Directionless? Carter? Unreachable? No posts. No tweets. His LinkedIn headline changed from VP of Strategic Operations to Open to Work in under 24 hours. Margaret got a call from Elliot Tran. Short, dry, respectful. Just wanted to say, read it, all of it. You wrote it perfectly, she thanked him. Didn't ask what else he'd seen by then. She'd already been contacted by Crescent Ridge again, quietly, discreetly this time with an offer, but that was next right now. She let herself sit in the stillness of victory. No champagne, no confetti, just the hum of her refrigerator and the legal pad she'd stopped writing. In its last line underlined twice, clause 14.2c executed us. Didn't just protect the asset, it protected her. A week to the day after the collapse, her phone rang. Unknown number, Chicago area code. Margaret let it buzz twice before answering. Cool and steady. Margaret Halpern. She knew the voice. Colin, Crescent Ridge Counsel. This time, no formality, no layered legal posturing. Just the tight, polite tone of a man calling not as a lawyer, but as a recruiter. We've reviewed everything, he said. No small talk. You were right. About the clause. About the compliance history. About all of it. Margaret waited. She'd learned long ago that the most powerful leverage in any room wasn't noise. It was silence. Colin cleared his throat. We'd like to bring you on as an external licensing consultant. Scope would include Sable, plus some adjacent portfolios we're negotiating out of Boston and Seoul. Fully remote, flexible structure. Paid monthly retainer, plus success fees. Her eyebrow lifted. Still hadn't spoken. Compensation would be, well, generous. 3 times your Midway base, plus options, plus full authority over Sable's assignment continuity if you accept. He paused. In plain English, you'd stay the assignee. Now she smiled, a little, just at the corner of her mouth. My only question, she said softly, was whether I'd keep control of the assignments. You will. She didn't ask who had to get fired, demoted, or chewed out to make that possible. Didn't ask how many internal debriefs or shareholder calls had begun with the phrase "we didn't realize" and ended in profanity. She didn't even ask who at Midway was still employed, because it didn't matter. She had the leverage, and that was all she'd ever needed. Send the paperwork, she said. I'll review it by tonight. No need, Colin said. It's already in your inbox. Executable PDF. We'll arrange courier signature for hard copy if needed. Argrid hung up without a goodbye. She walked to the kitchen, poured herself a second coffee, and opened her laptop. There it was, exactly as promised. Retainer agreement. Consultant onboarding. Clause 14.2c reaffirmed by both parties. Her name in bold, she signed. No parade, no fireworks. Just a click, a keystroke, and the quiet satisfaction of knowing the thing they tried to sell without her now belonged to her, permanently. It wasn't revenge. It was insurance. Later that afternoon, she opened her old Midway inbox. Still technically deactivated, but she'd kept a local archive. Thousands of messages. Mostly unread, mostly dull. But one thread caught her eye. Her final exchange with Carter. The last time he dared to respond, she clicked compose. To Carter Lane at midwaysystems.com. Subject. Legacy clause body. Still, just a footnote. No signature. No closer. Just those 5 words. She hit send. It wouldn't reach him. The account was long dead. But that wasn't the point. The point was that somewhere, buried in Midway's disaster archives, her name wasn't just in the clause. It was the clause. And Carter, he'd bet the company on a bluff he didn't understand. She didn't need to yell. Didn't need to gloat. She just needed to sign once. And that was enough to own the whole board. Big thanks, you legends of the old office days. Subscribe to keep the switch-flicking chaos alive. Your ex-boss is shaking in their loafers.